Hello again. We were talking to Michael Ventura, and in our last episode, we stopped when Michael left Clarendon and he had come to the offices of the Austin Chronicle and met Austin Sun, sorry, and met Jeff Nightbird, and you had gone down into the parking lot to speak to him. I think that's where we were.
Okay. So suddenly I was the theater critic of the Austin Sun, and you have to kind of step back and realize how funny that was, because most people don't get that kind of position unless they've have some kind of theater degree, some kind of journalism degree. They've been around for a while. I was winging it, completely winging it, and in a way, I'd been an actor all my life because I performed myself. Very consciously. I think I've spoken a little about, being a frail kid in the street, being not a tough guy. And I learned to look like one. I learned to behave from a distance like one, so that I got along. I could get along anywhere, any kind of environment. So in that sense, I knew something about acting, but not the way I came on. And I was going to get paid $15 a printed page. As I may have mentioned, I had about $5 in my pocket. Now, $5 then was like 20 now. I mean, on $5 you could buy a breakfast and a lunch and have enough left over for a pack of cigarettes. So it wasn't nothing. You could go to a movie on less than $1, but still, that's what I had. And my unemployment had run out. I was sleeping on somebody's couch. And as Joe Ely's mentioned in the documentary that I've seen, I guess now you'd call us homeless. We didn't think of ourselves that way. We were knocking around the country. We were doing what we wanted to do. If we had a place with a couch and somebody came knocking and we liked the look of them and said, "Yeah, you can stay here for a couple of days," it was that kind of subset, and not that it was called anything at the time. And so you go to the office and the theater, the phone rings, and Jeff says, "Talk to our theater critic." So at a little theater called the Creek Theater on 6th, right next to the creek, oddly enough, because the creek runs through there as you get into the east side. And they made a little theater out of a storefront, and they were putting on a dramatization of Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River anthology, and a one-man show of Woody Guthrie, a guy playing Woody Guthrie. And I saw both shows. I liked them a lot. And I wrote everything I could think of on my portable typewriter, sitting on the couch of somebody I didn't really know. I wrote about the kids looking in the window. I wrote about how I felt about these things as they related to politics. I wrote about how I felt about Woody Guthrie as I related to him. And so I was getting paid $15 a printed page. I got $35 for that piece.
Wow.
And it took 2 printed pages and a little bit of a jump. And $35 was a fortune. And it came out, hit the streets on my 29th birthday, October 31, 1974. And inexplicably, because there was no evidence that this was happening, but I felt very deeply, because when I got a call from Jeffrey Nightbird, he had given me a little job on the side being a proofreader. I think I mentioned this. And anybody who knows me, especially anybody who's worked with me, proofreaders, copy editors, knows that is just a total joke. I was the worst proofreader in the world. But it gave me, I forget, $10, $20 maybe. Marlene Brady was the typesetter. And so we just met. She became art director of the Austin Sun. Then she had a very successful career in animation in L.A. as a springboard from the Austin Sun. I think the Austin Sun was the first job she got, where she got to be top out art director, which was a good credit. And she was typesetting. She could type a mile a minute faster than I could. And I was proofreading, and then in the cellar of some company that didn't need the equipment at night. So the Austin Sun was renting their equipment at night for the typesetting and proofreading. And a phone rang, and Colleen said it was for me. And Jeffrey said, well, obviously you're the best writer who's walked in here. And I knew, without any evidence, that I felt I was on my way. This was the step I needed. This was the beginning of, I wouldn't have called it at the time a career, but that's what it was. And 40 years later, I met my last deadline on my 69th birthday in 2014. So that began a 40-year career of, I call it living by the deadline, where I worked for long stints at the Austin Sun, LA Weekly, briefly other places, then Austin Chronicle. And so that was the beginning. There I was. I was writing for a public. People were reading it. This was as far from my expectations or my dreams than I could imagine. Remember, I hung out my shingles a poet, and I'm not getting anything published. I hadn't tried to get anything published. That was all far away. I was just doing the writing. And I'd written, since my teens, long, long letters to people every week, 2-3 times a week. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 words. It wasn't unusual. I'd see a movie, and I'd write a letter about it to a friend. I'd see a play, and I'd write a letter to a friend about it. So I didn't know it, but I'd been in training to do this job. And finally, when I got a column on the LA Weekly, I called it Letters at 3 a.m. precisely for that reason. Because my whole training for this gig had been letters pretty much at 3 a.m. Because I was a working stiff until I left the East. When did I have time to write letters, long letters, except between like 11 o'clock and 2, 3 in the morning? And I had the kind of constitution in my 20s when I was never tired. If I got 2 hours of sleep, or if I got 6 hours sleep, it was all the same. I could just go and go and go. And I weighed about 122, 125 pounds. And it was energy. It was energy. I don't know how to describe it any other way. I can't put myself in that skin, but I remember what that guy did. I'm not trying to talk like a schizophrenic, but I remember what he did.
Yeah.
And how he had this energy and could work 12, 18 hours straight on a piece. Because at first, I had no idea what I was doing. My only goal was that my stuff not sound like everybody else's. And that meant I had to think of a different way to begin. I mean, these were reviews. They weren't supposed to be essays in that sense. I had to think of a different way to begin. I had to think of a different kind of form without ever intellectually going, I'm thinking of a different way to begin. I need another kind of form. I never said that. But I would feel kind of a shape that I wanted the essay to have. And pretty soon, I'm jumping around a little here, so let me get more sequential. So I was still knocking around. I stayed at one person's place, another person's place, and I'm writing for, there was a Garbo festival have a car. I'm walking everywhere. I went to a bunch of it, and I wrote a little piece about that. That was the first piece I wrote about movies. It was about the next issue of The Sun. Then there was another play. I wrote about that. And I was getting response because of the way I was writing, because it was personal. I wasn't writing like a normal reviewer. I was writing like I was writing a letter to a friend about this play or this movie. Well, I wasn't on movies yet, but about this play. Or the Garbo Festival. I let Jeff send me to the circus was in town. The Ringling Brothers Circus that doesn't exist anymore. And I saw the circus in New York City every chance I got. And so I'm writing about the circus. Can I write about the circus? And he said, yeah, go write about the circus. Not because he gave a damn about the circus, but because my writing was starting to catch on. People would see my name and know something was going to be said. It wasn't going to be normal.
Yeah.
It was going to be something in a particular voice that might speak to them.
Do you want to give a little bit of background on Jeff Nightbird?
Oh, sure. Jeff Nightbird is a study.
Yeah.
and I hope you're out there listening to this someday, Jeff. Jeff Nightbird is a study. What he did at the Austin Sun was remarkable, truly. He had an eye for talent. He was about my size, slight. An interesting thing when I applied, when we compared notes later, he thought I was Jewish and I thought he was Jewish.
Yeah.
We're neither of us Jewish.
Yeah.
Each of us thought the other guy was Jewish. And which tells you something about some studious rabbinical thing.
Yeah. I never when I was contemplating doing this episode, I was thinking about Jeff, and I had never thought about that before, but then I thought to myself, I asked myself if he was Jewish just from my remembrance of him, but it's funny that you bring that up.
And his given name was Shero, S-H-E-R-O,
Yeah.
and I think his heritage was Belgium.
Huh.
Now, it's always a little dicey with Jeffrey. For instance, he had an Austin Sun. We had a big Austin Sun reunion a few years back. Not many years back, before COVID, about 3 years before COVID. And he just had a triple or quadruple heart bypass.
Really?
He was looking pretty good. Yeah.
How
he was
old?
Looking pretty good.
Oh, okay.
He's 3 years older than me, so I'm 76. He's 79.
Yeah.
And he said his sister. He was having this conflict with his sister, and I said, you have to understand, for the late 70s and early 80s, Jeffrey and I were close. He knew everything about me. And he said, I'm having this conflict with my sister. And I said, I didn't know you had a sister. And he said, yeah, I have 5 of them. I said, what? And Big Boy Medlin was there, and J. Dave Moriarty, the managing editor, and Colleen Brady. None of us knew he had sisters. So that's a little portrait of Jeff Nightbird right there. But what he did at the Sun was he spotted me, Colleen Brady, James Big Boy Medlin, Bill Bentley, photographers, Stephanie Kratowski, A.V. Bonar, Tomas Martin, I think his name is, and Alan Pogue, layout people who were really good, Dan Hubig. And none of us had done this before. None of us had. Big hadn't written before for publication, or Bentley. Who knew that Bentley was going to be one of the most interesting music producers and music writers of his generation? And you could say that for each of us. I mean, we all had our careers in these fields, and they all began right then. And Jeffrey spotted this talent and just knew how to work with the writers and artists such that they did their own thing, but it had some kind of form that could get into print and make sense, whether it was visual or words or whatever it was. This was a great gift.
Is it okay to say it again? Is it okay to talk about Jeff Neipert's like activist stuff, or do you want to?
First let me give you before.
Sure, yeah.
Jeff had made his bones. He was the national vice president of the Students for Democratic Society in 1960, and as Jeff Sherrow, he was in the middle of all the major demonstrations. I'm talking the organizing stuff.
Yeah.
The anti-war stuff. SDS, Students for Democratic Society, was in the middle of that and was one of the leaders of all that from the mid-60s until basically the election of Nixon, but a little after that. By the early 70s, obviously, that had petered out in many ways. And Jeff, this was not his first newspaper. He had been the instigator of a newspaper based in Lower Manhattan called Rat. And Rat had published William Burroughs, all kinds of people, names and people who didn't have names, and they were going to get their phones turned off, but the FBI wouldn't let the phone company turn off the phones for non-payment because the FBI was listening into everything.
Yeah.
And they knew it. They weren't going to get their lights turned off, their phones turned off. And a lot of things went on Rat that I get only secondhand, so I don't want to testify to.
Yeah.
But so Jeffrey was in the middle of all that. For instance, on the Austin Sun, Abby Hoffman was still underground. He was wanted by the police, and he was for anti-war stuff and some trumped-up stuff. And the Austin Sun, Jeffrey, Abby was going through Texas, and he contacted Jeffrey, and Jeffrey, the Austin Sun ran a two-part cover story, two consecutive cover stories on Abby underground, at the risk of aiding and abetting a felon or a fugitive. And he knew all those people that Abby knew, and Jeffrey knew. And so they were all in that same kind of circle together. He and Abby had gone to Woodstock together. I was at Woodstock too, but I didn't know them, of course. And the story I got from Jeffrey is that Jeffrey pissed off Abby because, or Abby pissed off Jeffrey, one or the other. I can't remember which one did which. Because the camera was right there, and they made the finger at the camera, and the guy who didn't make the finger, one or the other, Abby or Jeffrey, said, "God damn it, now we're not going to be in the film," which was true. That's what happened. and so Jeffrey was very steeped in movement stuff. Also, before Rat, in Austin, they had started a weekly, what we called then underground newspaper, and now I'm being an old man because I can't remember the name of it, but it was still going with other people doing it when the Austin Sun was starting up. So he'd been doing this a while. Now Jeffrey was a great editor and a great talent spotter, and how can I put this fairly? Let's just say Jeffrey, from my point of view, he disagreed with this. He wanted to be a businessman, and he wasn't a businessman. And he wanted to be a kind of leader of us all, but we were all very strong personalities. and it was a collection of amazingly strong personalities, and and there wasn't much of a way to boss this bunch around or manipulate us. And he'd hired J. Dave Moriarty. Now, J. David Moriarty, is also a study in himself. He was one of the originators of, for want of a better phrase, the hippie comic book. And again, there are names I am completely blanking on, and that's what you get when you interview an old man. But it was out of San Francisco during the highlight of Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco. That San Francisco.
So like Last Gasp and
say it again.
Like Last Gasp and R. Crumb and that.
R. Crumb, yes.
Yeah.
R. Crumb.
Okay.
His outfit published R. Crumb first.
Okay.
And other people like that.
Yeah. Gilbert Shelton.
And exactly. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you. And he'd grown up in, it was Beaumont, Texas. That's right, near Louisiana. And went to high school with Janis Joplin. And he had his own deep experience. He was also a Marine veteran. Had his own deep experience of this. And it was, I believe, thanks to J. Dave, as I call him, that the Austin Sun lasted as long as it did, because he was managing editor and he managed to hold things together. Because Jeffrey was not a businessman. He managed to hold the business end together, even though it was very untenable, for a couple of years. Which, considering how broke everybody was and how chaotic everything was like walking to the North Pole. That kind of a feat. Until he finally had enough. He had his reasons. And another thing, and I just want to put it and set it, these people I've mentioned, all these people with the Sun, except for Jeffrey, because Jeffrey's kind of on the outside of everything. We meet up every once in a while. We're so close. Marty McKenzie, and Charlie Loving, and all these people who were loosely conglomerated back in the Sun days, we still know each other. Jasmine, my wife, had a long talk with Marty just last night. These bonds lasted. Even though we didn't see each other for years and years and years, these bonds lasted. We'd meet each other, meet up with each other, or have a little reunion, and it was like nobody ever went anywhere. There was no discomfort about it. We were just right there. So Jeffrey did do this remarkable thing. Jeffrey Sherrill Nightbird. And honor is due. He deserves credit for that. He fell out with just about every one of us for one reason or another.
He had a big ego.
That's there too. Say it again.
He had a big ego. In short.
Yeah. I don't know how to label it, but I do know this. Big Boy and Jeffrey and Sonny Carl Davis roomed with each other in Venice for 2-3 years, and Big Boy said, I never really knew Jeffrey. Colleen said, I worked with Jeffrey in the same room, day and night, with the Austin Sun for 2-3 years. I never knew Jeffrey. I thought I knew Jeffrey, but I didn't know Five Sisters. Obviously there was a big chunk I didn't know about Jeffrey. But he was brilliant at what he did at that time. I can't speak for later because we fell out. But he was brilliant at what he did. As aggravating as he might have been, as pissed off as you might get to him, he gave me a start, my start, and he gave other people. He didn't ask for creds. He didn't ask for credentials. He wanted to know if you could do what you thought you could do, and gave you a chance to do it. And I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time for that kind of action. Because this was a high caliber of people there. They were smart. We were a smart bunch. We didn't know about, about 8 years ago, a little cultural museum in Austin did at Jeffrey's instigation, I think, did a kind of museum exhibit of the Austin Sun. And all kinds of early issues are up there, and photographs and various stories by bunches of us. And as I'm going through this exhibit, and I spent my life, I was one of the founders of LA Weekly, and LA Weekly's still going in LA. Then the Austin Chronicle. I wasn't a founder of that at all, but they were inspired by the Sun, the founders of the Austin Chronicle, and I wrote for the Austin Chronicle for 21 years. They carried my column. And I'm looking, now that I know the business inside and out, and I'm looking at these Austin Sun pages going, my God, we were good. We didn't know it. We had no idea. We were just trying to get this paper out. The art was good. The writing was good. Big Boy, Carlene, Eric, Enrique Pasa, Rosenblum, Dean Rindy, others, Bentley. I mean, the writing was really good. And we were writing about things that were happening right then and there. I mean, the Sex Pistols did their first gig in the U.S.A. in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And our guys went down to cover that. Bill covered that. And in fact, he gave me the cassette tape. I just saw it this morning in my stuff. The cassette tape of that Sex Pistols concert.
Really?
I've still got it. Yep.
I'd like that. That's
it's
valuable.
Right over there. Now, do I know if a 40-year-old tape is going to play? No.
Yeah.
But I'll send it to you if you want it.
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
Got to dig the tape player out. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's Bentley, Sex Pistols. They figure out whenever you would know when they played San Antonio. Then they came to the Armadillo. Elvis Costello played his first gig in the U.S.A. at the Armadillo World Headquarters in Austin. I believe, I'm pretty sure of that. And all kinds of people were coming through there who were not big yet. Springsteen, all kinds of people. And so that's the second thing, really, that you found out about Austin at that time. It was the best kept secret musically that you could imagine. In those years, 75, 76, 77, 78, you had clubs, the Split Rail, Soap Creek Saloon, Armadillo World Headquarters, Antone's, the Continental's still there. And you had Antone of Antone's bringing in the best blues guys, some people who had only recently been resurrected, like Professor Longhair, but Bobby Blue Bland, Muddy Waters. Think of a great blues player at the time, and they played Antone's. Jerry Lee Lewis played Antone's. Carl Perkins played the Soap Creek Saloon. And you had bands, the local bands. You had Butch Hancock doing his first gigs. You had Joe Ely and his brand new band doing their first gigs, coming down from Lubbock. You had Stevie Ray Vaughan playing second guitar in Paul Ray and the Cobras at Soap Creek Saloon. He was about 17, and Denny Freeman was playing first guitar, the superb guitarist, Denny Freeman. And Stevie was playing second. And as good as Denny Freeman was, and he was special, don't get me wrong, there was something this young Stevie Ray Vaughan had that you just didn't see. it was just, the notes cut right through you, and it was really evident. And then Stevie formed his own band, Double Trouble, Triple Threat at first, with W.C. Clark and Luann Barton. And then it became Double Trouble with him and the rhythm section. And I've got a tape. Actually, they issued the album in the beginning. Stevie Ray Vaughan, you could hear it. His early stuff, like we're talking 1979, 1980. And he gave me that cassette tape I was carrying around in my car, and I'd play it for people who hadn't heard him yet. And I remember Big Boy hadn't heard him. I don't know, we're traveling in different circles. Somehow he hadn't heard him. Hadn't heard him when he started Double Trouble. And this is jumping ahead, living in L.A., and I'd been to Austin. Stevie had given me the tape, and I played it in the car. Big Boy and I were going somewhere, and Big Boy said, "Is that two guitars?" And I said, "No, that's just Stevie Vaughan." This is before we put the Ray in there. And so you had this atmosphere in Austin of tremendous creativity in music, but also in art. The poster art of that era of Austin is classic and is worth a fortune now. Jim Franklin and Michael Priest and others, where it was just every week you had it in the Austin Sun. You had it, these posters, here and there where people put rock and roll posters, and you had all this music. And it was a scene where it didn't start until 10 o'clock at night. You didn't go out to the clubs before 10 o'clock at night. There was no point. And you hit one club, you hit another, you'd go till closing time was 2 in the morning. And you could hear amazing stuff every night for very little money. And if you were Austin Sun, you could probably get in free. So that was quite a time that way. And I don't want to exaggerate it, because look, we were people mostly in our 30s who were confused, messed up, going through all this stuff. Everything was a drama. We were as liable to be assholes as to be anything else. We smoked too much. We drank too much. I never did drugs, so I don't know about that scene. Coke, all that stuff. I don't know about that. I can't speak to that. But even pot, that just, I think I did pot 3 times in my life. So it was this nightlife, honky-tonk thing that the Austin Sun was part of. The Austin Sun was the first paper to really feature local musicians, because there was the University of Texas paper that for some reason didn't touch local culture much. There was the Austin American Statesman, which is a pretty solid daily covering Texas generally, but it was square in terms of the culture. So you had this very lively paper that was politically radical. This was the other thing. And we had several Vietnam veterans on the staff. Alan Pogue, the photographer, Big Boy Medlin, and there was this consciousness against the war. Remember, in 1974, the war is just about to end. Now, the war in Vietnam has been going on for 10 years. And it's just about to just end, and the U.S. it's going to end ignominiously. Nothing anybody could call a victory. It's going to end in a rout. And there was this sick feeling, because Nixon had been elected president, and he tried to bomb Vietnam into surrendering, and that didn't work. He bombed Laos and Cambodia too, and that didn't work. They never attacked us. It was criminal. But it was clear that he'd been reelected. were a far left paper. We didn't have an economic platform. In Europe, they wouldn't call us exactly left because their politics is much more organized than ours.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that people know Austin for the music scene there, but it's also the capital of Texas, and
right.
I mean, politics must have played into the scene there in some ways. Different politicians.
Yes, there were bars. There were bars. In fact, one of them was right across the street from the Austin Sun, and again, I can't remember the name, where the political people would gather. There was a lot of state politics, and you have to remember that the country wasn't anywhere near as divided as it has been the last 15 years.
Right.
Texas, had voted Democratic. Lyndon Baines Johnson had been president, and was still alive when we got to Texas. When I got to Texas, so it wasn't as divided as now. There were rural towns, there were Democrats. They're outnumbered even then, but they were Democrats. They weren't afraid to say so. But yeah, the state politics were I'm fizzling out on that. I have to mention Michael Aiken. He was the co-founder and co-editor of the Austin Sun with Jeff Nightbird. He had been a pretty hotshot editor on the Daily Texan, which was the University of Texas paper. And he had gotten, I'm assuming now, a bunch of the backing for the Austin Sun beginning. And he was handling most of the politics. And there was a big falling out between Jeff and Aiken. I supported Jeffrey. Aiken went out on his own. Apparently, he was investigating the Texas nuclear power industry when he was assassinated. What they call a clean hit, small caliber execution. Nobody ever went up for it. He was assassinated in Houston or Dallas, I forget which. Usually, one of the stranger things about the first big Austin Sun kind of reunion, which was around 2013, something like that, was I realized when the night was over, nobody had mentioned Michael Aiken. Nobody. And I thought, how strange. And so I'm glad I remembered him to mention him. Now, he didn't form close bonds with any of the people I've been talking about. And he wasn't well liked for no special reason that I know. I don't know why. I didn't like him much, but I did. At the same time, I didn't mind him. He let me stay at his place for a couple of weeks when I was sleeping from one place to the other. He made a pallet on his floor over on West 6th. But he was one of the people there. He deserves to be mentioned. He was one of the people who started the Austin alternative paper scene. It is an odd little hole in the history that people could talk about the Austin Sun and talk about the Austin Sun and never mention his name. It's interesting how that happens sometimes in history. You wonder, as you go along and study different passages of history, who's the Michael Aiken in this story? Who was instrumental in getting everything started and nobody ever hears of him again.
Yeah.
And so there is Michael Aiken, and Jeff hired me, but the paper wouldn't have been there without Jeffrey and Michael Aiken. So, so there's that. and that wrinkle in history, which is that some things don't get recorded, and some things don't get emphasized, even if they're crucial, even if they're essential, pivotal, and some things just get overlooked. And it's hard to give a reason why, because certainly in this, like that reunion that I talked about just now, we were all there. We all talked all night and drank all night, and there was music, and it was amazing to see each other again. Some of us hadn't seen each other in decades, and it had been just a kind of somebody talk to somebody, and J. Michael and Sarah Clark, one of the Austin Sun people who died, I think, in the late 1990s. They had built designed and built a home just facing the river in East Austin, and had a big veranda, and J. Dave threw the party, and everybody was there. Everybody was still alive, and I flew in from L.A. to be there. And I realized when I got back to my hotel room, I was kind of writing things down to just remember them, just what people had said. I realized, man, not one person of us mentioned Michael Aiken, at least in my hearing. I didn't come upon one conversation in which he was mentioned. Isn't that strange? Anybody should remember Michael Aiken. We should. But I didn't think of him until I got back to the hotel. And, none of us had any reason not to mention him. It's not like, the nuclear power people of Texas had put the glom on us. None of us had. He just kind of disappeared from our consciousness.
So he was doing an investigation for a story on the nuclear industry?
He was, but do we know that's why he was killed? No.
Yeah.
Because we don't know anything.
Yeah.
We just know he was killed. The word was that he was doing an investigation for a story. That's entirely possible. But nothing was ever found out. As far as I know, there was only a perfunctory investigation into his murder. But that's one mystery. But the other mystery is why he slipped through our memories. And that's the kind of mystery, historical mystery, that you can never get a hold on, just except to wonder how many times that happens in any historical instance where there's somebody just not being mentioned who deserves mention, who was instrumental, and yet just gets passed over. It's weird. Which isn't a very profound thing to say, but I'm just very glad that I thought to mention him now. Because if we'd gone through all this and I woke up at 3 a.m. and went, oh my God, I didn't mention Aiken. And then I'd have to go, how much do I actually know about Aiken? I remember how he looked. He was a good writer, a professional kind of writer. Not a stylist, but a good journalism kind of writer. He did good work. He wasn't, again, like Jeffrey, he wasn't much of a leader. Jeffrey didn't lead so much as instigate, and Michael didn't even really do that. But anyway, I just leave that there. And maybe on that mystery we should segue out, because there's other people to talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm about talked out on this one.
You are? Okay. All right. Yeah, it was a good episode. I got a good picture of Austin at that time, and I guess we'll carry on with Austin next time too.
Yeah, if you can remember it, ask me about the economics.
Okay.
It's amazing how it's amazing if that thing could even happen.
The economics of the paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the feel of Austin at that time.
Did Jeff not have
economically?
Did Jeff not have a kind of a woman that there was like a woman that kind of funded his scene a little bit or something like that? Am I mistaken? No.
There were several contributors
Yeah.
to the Austin Sun.
Okay.
And I was vague on some of that. There was a board. There were several contributors. And this is not confirmed at all by me, so I don't want to put this on the air.
Yeah.